Doug, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Ryan.
Yeah, I'm very excited. You and I were just chatting about another report that you had just launched as well. And I've had Tom Stewart, your old director, on a couple times, and I saw an email came out with your name on it. You were doing a webinar. It was like the end of August, early September, and I was like, oh my god, I got to get Doug on to share some of the new reports and some of the things that guys have got going on. Because as I was just sharing with you, Doug, getting insights of what's going on to the things that really matter for privately held businesses is one of my things. And you guys are out there fighting the good fight and have been doing it longer than I have too. So I appreciate it. And I'll just want you to, for the listeners, give a little bit of your background and how you ended up at the National Center for the Middle Market, and then kind of what the mission is of the National Center and whatever the acronym is that you want to use.
Yeah,
Is it the NCMM or
yeah,
what?
yeah. So NCMM is a lot easier and shorter to say, but yeah, Middle Market Center, National Center for the Middle Market. I mean, we go by a couple different names, but yeah, I'll tell you a little bit first about a little bit about my background. So I kind of stumbled into this role. I'm not an academic. I'm not a member of the faculty, even though our center is based at the Fisher College of Business. I actually spent most of my career in operations and supply chain.
Oh, really?
I started right out of undergraduate. I went to Penn State, studied business there, and had a family friend who was a principal in a very small consulting company. We had 5 owners and like 15 consultants all over the United States. And they were some of the early founders of the Six Sigma methodology. So
Oh, no
4 of the 5 owners were out of Motorola. So they were back in the 80s when all of that was being kind of developed. And as they were growing, their big customer at the time was General Electric. And then they started moving on to Allied Signal and Ford Motor and Navistar, some other big companies. And they were really kind of disorganized. So they needed somebody to kind of come in on the back end and run all of the business operations. So, at 23, having zero experience and knowledge, I had no idea what I was doing. Plus, I was kind of working virtually at the time. Helped set up our first website, helped find our
That's
first
awesome.
bank, our first lawyer, our first everything, pretty much everything. And throughout the course of that, then I had the opportunity to go through the Six Sigma Black Belt training. I sat in on a wave with Navistar in Chicago and then ended up getting certified as a black belt through a project that I did with them. So great experience. We actually merged with another consulting company called Qualtech they were out of Scottsdale. So I spent a year kind of traveling back and forth between Ohio and Scottsdale, and then got to do a little bit of client training and was focusing on more of the marketing and business development. And then I decided I want to go back to school. So my wife had just passed the Ohio bar at the time, and we kind of narrowed into the state because we wanted to, make sure that she could practice
I
law.
was just
So
saying that just answered my question of why didn't you end up in Arizona? I was like,
yeah.
and the wife got her bar, went to the pastor bar in Ohio. That makes sense.
Yes. Yeah. So I looked at a couple schools, but for us, Ohio State was kind of the no-brainer because Columbus offered her lots of different opportunities. So I came down to Fisher College of Business and entered the full-time program, and studied for 2 years. I originally was going to study corporate finance, but then I switched to operations and logistics. We've got a pretty strong program at the college.
Cool.
And the summer between my first and second year, I interned with a company here in Columbus, which at the time was known as Limited Brands, and then eventually L Brands, and now no longer even exists. That company, that entity is gone. But large retail company. I think when I was there, we had 8 different brands, but
Wow.
largely focused on 2, which was Victoria's Secret and Bath and Body Works.
Mm-hmm.
So after graduating from the Fisher MBA program, then I accepted a role as an analyst and kind of worked my way through that organization, primarily supporting the supply chain group. Spent a few years as a analyst, logistics analyst. Then I moved into frontline operations. I was a distribution center manager, senior manager. At one point, I had all of the outbound distribution for 1,600 Bath and Body Works stores across the
Whoa.
U.S. Um, and then my last couple of years, I moved into more of a inventory and supply chain planning role. And then my last official role there, I was actually supporting international expansion. So helped support opening stores in the Middle East and Turkey and the United Kingdom, which was great. Got to do some traveling. But I was approached by the college, actually, my former career management director, who kind of helped me as a mentor with a lot of advice and so forth, reached out in the summer of 2011 and said, "Hey, the college is getting ready to open a new research center. It's going to be a partnership with GE Capital." And I was like, "Oh, it's going to be like some supply chain or logistics focus." Then like, "No, it's going to be on the middle market." And I'm like, "Okay, what is that?" Like I'd
It's,
never heard of that term
it
before.
doesn't include a company with 1,600 Bed Bath and Beyonds.
Yeah. So, given that story I just told, 15-person company, 10,000 person, Fortune 500 company, I had never really even heard that term. So I kind of politely said, "Thanks, but I'm good where I'm at. I'm really enjoying what I'm doing." So about a month later, got a call back again. "Hey, we've still got this director role we're trying to fill." And so I finally came down to speak with our dean at the time. And, she just kind of laid out a really compelling opportunity, basically to build something from scratch that no other school in the United States was doing, which is to study and serve the middle market. And so I, took that back with me, had a lot of plane time. I remember a flight over to Istanbul, Turkey, where I spent like 10 hours just mapping out all the questions I had and the
Hmm.
pros and cons. And so I made the decision to take the leap and join the center right when we launched in October 2011. And so right after the ribbon cutting with GE, I kind of stepped into an empty office suite. Had a couple chairs and a couple of desktops, and from there just started
And,
hiring some student staff. And those first 3 or 4 years, just working really really closely with the GE folks on kind of laying out what was the vision and the mission. First
mhm.
of all, like, let's agree on that, and then what are the steps we're going to take to start building the foundation of what the center could become. And we really just focused on three big buckets: research, outreach and engagement, and education. And that's kind of still what we follow today.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm sitting there. First of all, like super cool background story of like how you guys got to where you are, and like I mean, you guys have been at it for quite a while now. And I was thinking about your background, Doug, and I'm like, my God, you must have been watching this last 36 months because you have intimate knowledge of supply chains and
Yes.
inventory and a black belt.
Yes. Yes.
I bet your head's about ready to explode with all the inefficiencies that have been going on and all the chaos.
Yeah. Well, on one hand, it's like kind of nice to see the profession that I was in for so long get a lot of, notoriety, but for the wrong reasons, right? I
Yeah,
mean, it's
right.
like, yeah, everyone in my family is like, "Hey, you were a supply chain expert. Like, why can't I get bread at the store?" You
Yeah,
know,
it's when
it's
nothing's going wrong, you get no attention, right? Because it means you're doing your job, right?
yes.
Uh,
Yeah. Yep.
so why don't you walk us through a little bit because you've got some more some studies that have been recently published, and then also
Yep.
you've got some projects on the docket for next year. But like,
Yep.
what have you guys been at? What's the approach, the philosophy, and how you guys go about it?
Yeah. So, first of all, I think I should just do like a quick overview of the middle market as we
Mm-hmm.
define it. There's a lot of different organizations out there that have their own kind of view, and that's fine. Like, we've never tried to consolidate the entire marketplace around a singular definition. Although I would say more and more organizations have continued to adopt the way we look at it. So from the time that the center launched, we have used a revenue-based definition of 10 million to $1 billion. Now, the first question I always get is like, "No way, that's way too big of a range. It's huge, right? You can't compare a $20 million company with an $800 million company." And so, in a lot of the work that we do, particularly these semi-annual middle market indicators, we have the ability to sub-segment by different revenue sizes. So then you are getting more of an apples to apples comparison. But
However, can I make a
yeah,
comment
go
on that,
ahead.
Doug? Is like what's super interesting is like you've probably seen it, but like there's the listeners have heard me talk about this U.S. Census Bureau like snapshot that I've got, and it's definitely outdated since the most recent census, but it was like out of the 6 million privately held companies, there's 27 million, but then there's like 21 million that don't have an employees, and then there's 6 million that have employees, and they kind of break it down, Doug.
Yeah,
And there's like 5.6 million of those companies that are underneath 5 million in revenue.
correct. Yep.
And then between 5 and 100 million, there's only 330,000 or something like that. And then there's 20,000 above that. So I think it's very interesting that you guys have chosen, because like essentially you're getting Main Street out, which there's kind
Right.
of a lot of attributes that I think that happen inside it. So I think it makes sense, I guess, is
Yeah.
my only comment I would say, based on how I saw that.
Yeah. It kind of predates my time, but it's my understanding that when the college first started looking at a lot of the data. So when we compiled our first view of the middle market, we used multiple sources. It was the census, CompuStat, Dun and Bradstreet. Like we had
Mm-hmm.
to piecemeal together because that's another issue that continues to this day. There's really no singular source of information on the middle market. I mean, yes, you can go to the U.S. Business Census, but even in that case, you're going to get rolled up information. It's all de-identified.
Mm-hmm.
But my understanding is that we started with a narrower definition, and then as it started to go out, we just basically landed on the middle third of the U.S. economy based on GDP output.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then 10 million to a billion is very easy to remember and describe. So,
Well, it makes
it's
sense.
worked well.
Which as you sorry, and I want you to continue explaining what the middle market is in other terms if you need, is like it's a third of the GDP, and you said there's no information about it, which is just absurd to your whole
Right.
point.
Right. Yeah. No, that's been so when we think about our mission, it's about making sure that the middle market gets recognized as being fundamental to the success of the U.S. economy, because so much of the focus, whether it be academic research, media coverage, events and programs, not to pinpoint chambers of commerce, but we've worked with a lot of them across the country over the years, but they will be the first to admit that there just hasn't been a lot that they've even done locally within their region for their middle market, because one, they don't know who they are. And two, I would say, a lot of the funding comes from their big enterprise companies as more of a community
Mm-hmm.
service. And then most of the programming gets developed for the small businesses that actually need that and can benefit from it. So there's been a void, and most middle market businesses I talk to say, well, we don't really have a need to join our chamber because there's not a lot there for us.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's an interesting, kind of an opportunity to continue to shed light on these businesses. So what we have learned over the years, these companies are everywhere, right? So mostly focused in the 10 million to 50 million. About 80% of the total middle market resides in that lower
Mm-hmm.
end. They are literally in every city, town, industry. I mean, you name it. They're all over the United States. So, I mean, I'll just take Columbus, Ohio as an example. Most people would not know. I mean, we've got probably somewhere between 12 and 1,300 middle market companies just within Central Ohio.
That makes
So,
sense, because I think when I did my research, and I did my research like 8 years ago, Doug, in Minnesota, and it like first of all, I had to clobber together from all over the place, and I think it was like 16 or 20,000 in Minnesota or
yeah,
something like that. So it
yeah,
makes sense. Huh.
yep. Yeah, and we've tried to tell this story. When most people think of tech, it's like, well, Silicon Valley. When you think of markets and finance, it's like, oh, East Coast, Wall Street, and all that. Well, the middle market isn't really you can't really paint it in a certain area or in a certain set of industries, just kind of everywhere. So we have built a research library, as I mentioned, research, outreach, and education. So we have done. This is going to be coming up here in December. We're getting ready to go out right after the Thanksgiving holiday. We're going to be in our 38th wave of the MMI.
Oh, cool.
So, to our knowledge, the longest continually running study of middle market performance, and I'll kind of share the summer highlights here in a moment. We've also done, somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 studies, either functional studies, industry studies, special reports, and with a variety of partners as well. So we have sponsors that we work with, kind of on an exclusive standpoint in terms of funding and intellectual capital that they help contribute to the center. But we've also worked with various partners around the country. The Brookings Institute comes to mind. We did a paper with The Economist. We've done work with FedEx. And I'll talk a little bit more, maybe a bit later, about a project that we've got going on right now with Google that we're really excited about. So lots of different interests from basically enterprise companies that serve the middle market, and they work with us to try to understand what those needs and opportunities are so they can do a better job of that.
It makes me so happy, man, because like I think about like, well, there's obviously a reason that these big enterprises want to know about the middle market. Well, like you said, it's a third of the GDP. It's the backbone. I mean, and as you probably get into this, like I have been so sick and tired of watching the news over the last 2 years of like, I just looked at my wife. My wife could give two shits about this stuff. And I'm like, I am so sick of everybody paying attention to people that don't make any money. Like I'm just, just like, right, and now everybody's caring about the middle market because the middle market has cash flow. Right. So like, but yet they have the least amount of resources. So I think it's just such a noble cause. And so, can you speak a little bit, Doug, to like how you guys go about getting your information and what the kind of like the studies on how you guys capture that information?
Yeah. So really the key for us is that we're a relatively small organization. We're a few people. We've got some students that work for us here at the college. And so we rely pretty extensively on partners that help us collect information and then really design and publish the content in a way that's insightful and useful. And I would say, if anything that we've learned over the years is, we've continued to kind of narrow down and shorten the content just based on attention span and ability to consume. I mean, it was not too long ago where we would crank out 30-page, white papers. And we just found that like nobody has the time or the appetite for that. It's like, give me the insights and what should
graphics, man. I remember when I pulled up your guys' material, I was like, this is built for visionary entrepreneurs. Yeah. It's graphs and infographics. And I think about like the Pepperdine private capital market study. It's like 180 pages. Yeah. And you truly need a PhD to read it versus like yours, like, oh, graphs. I get it.
Yeah. So what we do is almost all of our work is they're self-administered surveys. So we work with a third-party company. They do a great job of helping us collect the right data. They have access to panels of executives who are basically pre-qualified. So we know that they are senior leaders, whether it's the owner, founder, COO, CFO, somebody who has financial decision-making authority. So that way they kind of understand the mechanics and the levers that are driving business performance. And then we also know that they're at companies between 10 million and $1 billion. So we're not getting, a bunch of surveys that come in with extraneous responses that we don't really care too much about. From there, the research company takes the responses and they weight it to the US Census so that we know the results that we're publishing then they're demographically accurate. They're not going to be biased, skewed to a certain industry or a certain part of the country.
That's awesome.
And so that's been our process. It's worked really well. We've talked at various times about maybe creating like a council or group of companies who we could continually go back and survey and ask follow-up questions of. We just never have gotten to that point yet, but could be something that we do in the future. And then some of these partners that I mentioned, they'll tend to work with us to design the survey. What's the topic we want to focus on? MMI aside. Let's develop a set of questions. Let's learn about kind of what's the landscape of that topic, and then start to dig deeper into some of the insights that we can share then with our audiences and talk about.
So, Doug, just for clarification, when you said MMI, so that's the middle market index, right? Right?
Indicator.
So indicator. So that's the 2 times a year, and then you're talking specifically about mining that data for additional insights.
Okay. We do both. So we publish the main report, and then I would describe it as the report is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, beneath that, we're sampling 1,000 companies, and we have a treasure trove of data. There's so much information on there, and it can be sliced in so many different ways because of how big that sample is. So I'm not a statistician. I mean, I study the Six Sigma stuff, but all I know is that when you're getting 100, 150 companies per industry, let's say, you could start to look at each of those industries
So cool.
and have statistically significant data to say this is what the middle market is telling us. So, yeah, that's been our approach. And then I think the key for us has been, some other academic centers that I see, not only within Fisher College of Business, but across the country. Whenever I travel or I'm at a university, I try to like stop into other centers and see what they're up to. Sometimes they just don't do a great job of maybe getting out and sharing that information and really engaging with different audiences. So we have made it a really, really big priority of ours to find partners around the country. And literally pre-pandemic, we were traveling coast to coast 40 or 50 days a year,
Wow.
presenting these insights at industry conferences, at chambers, at different venues, to try to, again, get more conversation going and just educating a lot of the country around what exactly the U.S. middle market is.
That the economic impact over the next 5 to 10 years of what happens in the middle market, I think, is so huge and we don't have the understanding of the implications of it, in my opinion, Doug. Because before we get into, because you have some of these reports that you can, and one of the kind of teeing up one of the insights of the reports that I know you're going to unpack. It's like, I think about it, Doug. People always talk about this silver tsunami, right? The baby boomer tsunami of the people transitioning their companies. And I won't get too much into it, but just kind of giving you some of the context of how I think is that, like, out of all these companies, like if 95% of them are below 5 million in revenue, I mean, those are like jobs that are going to transition hands. Like there's less flexibility because of the limited cash flow than you have with the more of the middle market, the 10 million plus. We're like, if that, it's almost like how capital accumulates at the top, where like if we're not out there talking about the different ways to transition, how these are valued, and how they can get access to capital, like the ability to those almost to just disappear and go right up to the top is probably high. And I can only imagine these economic institutes or economic developments care about that, because all of a sudden these companies are just disappearing out of the heartland. I mean, like it's a big deal for a lot of these cities and governments.
Yeah. Well, that's a question we get pretty frequently is like, hey, do you have the list of all the middle market companies? Or if not that, do you have the list of all the middle market companies in Dallas, Texas?
Right? with the CEO's name and their address.
Right. And it's, while it is a very, very noble pursuit, and I think one that would have immense value, the fact of the matter is that list is changing almost daily. For some of the reasons you just described. You've got a lot of exit activity. You've got a ton of M&A activity. You've got a ton of private equity activity. You've got middle market companies that are being bought. You've got companies growing into and out of. So, I mean, it is the minute you got the list done, the next day it would change. Right?
I was just on a call and someone said it's like trying to identify the shape of a ball of Jello. I'm like, that's very random insight for you. So let's talk about so you do 2 surveys a year. So that's the middle market indicator, you said?
Correct.
Okay.
Middle market indicator.
And then you just had a recent one that's the owner's transition. Maybe you kind of, because I'm going to tee it up to you, Doug, on how you want to unpack this, because there's a couple different ways you can do it.
Let's talk about the middle market indicator first. I'm just going to focus on this slide because it kind of encapsulates the key findings. So just as a recap, we survey 1,000 businesses twice a year. What I'm showing are the results from our mid-year study. This data would have been collected during the first 3 weeks of June of this year. We are getting ready, actually had a call this morning to finalize our survey, which will go out next Monday, right after the holiday. It'll be collected during December, and then we'll publish our year-end report in January of next year. So that's kind of the cadence. But let me just walk through what we found from the summer.
I love it. Yep.
So, kind of starting on the left-hand side, these are the foundational pieces of the MMI that have remained largely unchanged over 11 years. When we designed this, we spent a lot of time thinking about what would allow the center to keep kind of a pulse on performance. And we came up with top-line revenue growth, employment growth, capital investment planning, confidence in various levels of the economy, and then key challenges or headwinds to growth. Mm-hmm. We landed on those 5. We thought they were, fairly well representative of overall performance. Now, from time to time, do we get questions about, well, what's EBITDA and what's profit? And yes, but we made the decision that, revenue is revenue, top line is top line. It can't be adjusted. It can't be, messed with in terms of the owner wants to put the yacht on the business.
I was just man, you're getting, there's a reason no earnout should be tied to gross profit or EBITDA, and the same reason that you should not have self-reporting tied on. Yeah, I totally get it.
So this survey, elements of it do change from wave to wave, and I'll talk a little bit about some of those from the summer. We try to pick out new topics that may be, top of mind for owners, like what's going on in the macroeconomic environment. What do we know are the big headline concerns that you see the stories, happening for big businesses or small businesses. And then we try to fill that gap with, okay, now we've got some data for how the middle market is viewing these things. Mm-hmm. And I'll talk about a few of those, but let's just go through these really quickly. So top line revenue growth, 12% on average. That is the highest that we've seen in 11 years. So what we've been monitoring, and really since the start of the pandemic in March 2020, we saw two surveys where there was a definite dip and decline. Mm-hmm. Revenues were down and employment was actually down, first time ever, but then a very rapid recovery. That those numbers started to bounce back as early as a year ago in the summer of 2021, and they've continued to remain strong. So 12.2% tied for the highest we've ever seen in the survey.
Wow.
The S&P 500, which we kind of use, we do a comparison. We grab that data, which is publicly available, at 10%. So just gives us a little bit of a benchmark. Mm-hmm. And then projected over the next 12 months, so through the middle of next year, to be about 9%. So still relatively strong. What we have noticed in the history of the MMI is that generally the projections tend to be very conservative, and the actual performance almost always, with the exception of COVID hitting that nobody could see that coming, they always outperform the projections.
Interesting. Yeah.
Employment growth, kind of similar story, 10.8%. That's the same as it was at the year end 2021. So very, very strong. Far outpacing both small and large business. So for that, we use ADP. They publish a nice kind of a monthly employment report. It's based on headcount, but it serves as a fairly good proxy for small and large. And the middle market, is more than doubling large business growth as a percentage.
That's crazy.
And projected to be close to 11% going forward. Now, the big challenge with that number is that we're continuing to hear about issues, even though we're still pretty historically low unemployment, a lot of challenges around finding people and finding the people with the right skills to help support the projected growth. So
and I don't know this is such an interesting question I get all the time, is the ability to pay those people what the inflation of the employment market is demanding.
And that's where we've seen the biggest, when I talk about some of the highlight issues, I'll talk a little bit more about that. Capital investment planning, we ask an interesting question in the survey. So if you had an additional $1 of revenue, what would you do with it?
I like how you prefaced that.
It places it puts that respondent in the position to go, okay, well, this is what would I save it? Am I going to save it as cash? Am I going to invest it in some instrument, or am I going to put it back into the business? So this percentage, 59%, it's slowly starting to bounce back. I would say pre-COVID, the historic average was around 68, 70% of the businesses were saying they were going to invest, and then the other 30 would hold it. When COVID hit, it almost became 50-50. There was so much uncertainty that businesses were like, hey, cash is king. I'm going to hold on to that, and I'm just going to slow down or delay investments in my business. And now what we're seeing is because of inflation, interest rates, geopolitical uncertainty, a lot of stuff going on, that conservatism is starting to come back a little bit. And then we're also seeing it in these confidence numbers. So we look at global confidence, U.S. economic confidence, and then local, which would be your own, city, region, wherever you do business. The pattern always remains the same, that the confidence is highest within the local economy, because we know that's where a majority of these companies have their suppliers and their customers and their employees. It's the area they know best. Mm-hmm. Whereas global economy, it's like, hey, what do I read in the news or what do I see online? There's a war going on in Eastern Europe. There's issues going on in China or Asia. That kind of influences how they respond to that. But these numbers
or them talking to their supplier, their vendor, who's actually manufacturer from, like, it's a direct conversation from someone over there, but it's very anecdotal compared to anything else.
Yep. And we're watching these confidence numbers closely because they were the highest we've ever seen in the summer of 2021. And here we are a year later, we can see them starting to drop pretty rapidly across all three of these dimensions. So I'm really curious to see what happens when we collect this next wave of data, because my assumption is, given where inflation's at and rates continuing to rise, we're going to see these numbers continue to go down. And then let me talk about the last one, which isn't on the slide, but it's the three big issues that companies are worried about. One is inflation. So, we're seeing it across wages, about the ability to compete for talent. We're seeing it in, obviously the raw materials and those types of things. A majority of the companies are just kind of making the decision to either pass that along to their customers or biting the bullet and just eating it in their margin rates and taking a hit to profit. So every business of every size is dealing with this, right? It's a macroeconomic issue. There's not a lot of control that these companies have. But what we are seeing are like some kind of creative things around negotiating longer term agreements in exchange for rate deals, doing things with their supply base a little bit differently. But yeah, it's a big concern.
Well, and Doug, just so super, super interesting. So I didn't even tell you before we jumped on that. So we have a fractional CFO business and a financial dashboard offering as part of a service offering that we have. And so like I have like these weird insights of like the spanning of the middle market of various industries, from e-commerce to online to manufacturing to services. So like I'm truly get to see inside of like kind of the exact companies you're talking about. And all I think about is Jay Powell and Yellen up top looking at their spreadsheets of like what's going on. And I'm like, all I'm doing is talking to normal people. And to your point, they're like, oh, we're getting 20 to 30% increases from our suppliers and vendors. And then they're just immediately turning around. And so I'm sitting here going like, everywhere I hear these double digit increases that people are doing, and they're like, oh, inflation's tapering off at 7%. I'm like, I'm having all these conversations. And to your point of like, some people are choosing to bite the bullet. And I would argue that the only people that are biting the bullet are the people that didn't have the information to pass it on as fast as they wanted to. I don't know if you're seeing it. It's just like, you watch this golf ball go down through the hose, and it's just, I don't think it's done, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I think a related issue is a lot of these businesses still use kind of traditional bank partners to fund growth. So whether it's taking out a loan, getting a line of credit, and all. So as rates continue to increase, that's going to have the effect of delaying a lot of these capital investments or improvements that they're looking to make, or, hey, I want to build a new facility, or I want to invest in an ERP platform or Salesforce, or buy some, new tech that's going to digitize my company. Well, now what used to cost me, 2 or 3% a year ago is now 10%. And so it's going to have some issues, related to growth that we'll see bear out. The second big challenge is supply chain disruption. So we started looking at this a year ago. Last fall at this time, there were all, I remember, and again, this is the old supply chain person in me, seeing all the cargo ships docked outside of LA that couldn't get into the ports. I was like, this is like the worst nightmare of a retail supply chain person. But we started asking questions about that. And it's despite what, I'm seeing some things where it's like, oh, these disruptions are getting better. I think they're just shifting. They're kind of moving to different places. And in this survey, close to 90% of the middle market companies were saying that they had some type of disruption in the last 6 months.
Wow.
And it's impacting their 2022 revenues somewhere in the area of 5 to 6% of a hit on average.
I believe that.
So it's not just a inconvenience; it's actually a financial disruption as well as a materials flow disruption. So
Well,
that's
and
been a
don't you
big
think?
challenge.
And I
Yep.
don't know if this is in your survey, but like as countries become more nationalistic and then like, they're onshoring, which will probably be inflationary as well as like, so like you said, I was talking to one of my clients who's got actually a trucking company. I mean, logistics company. So they've got another weird insight of how things are going. And he's like, it took 20 years to stitch together the most perfect supply chain. And then you ripped it apart in 1 year and then it's going back differently because of the nationalism.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're probably
Yeah.
sitting there again like with some heartburn, but like,
Yeah.
yeah, I can totally see the lagging effects of like even if it went back to perfect, it would still take a long time to get the financial, engine humming along.
Yeah, and we asked like, hey, so as follow up to, okay, you've been disrupted. What are you doing about it? Like, how are you trying to mitigate some of these concerns? And really, none of them are all that surprising. I mean, number one is we're just going to carry a lot more inventory. And again, as a supply chain person, that's like heartburn, right? Because it's like that's what you're trying to avoid is having a lot of inventory because then that ties up your working capital and so forth. But that's kind of an easy lever for the company to say, we're
Yep.
not going to have 3 months of safety stock. We're going to have 6 because we want to protect ourselves. I'd rather have that sitting around than have disappointed customers. But then you have to find more space to hold the inventory. Again, it's
More
tying up your
cash. Yeah.
capital,
Yeah.
cash,
Yeah.
all those things. Another one is, and based on prior work, we know that a lot of middle market companies tend to develop really, really close collaborative relationships with maybe one or two key suppliers.
Mm-hmm.
They're starting to rethink that because the risk now of that supplier being disrupted or being in a part of the world that they just can't get their goods moving, they're starting to diversify and think about, okay, I need alternative sources, whether that's
Mm-hmm.
geographically or having an array of maybe 2 or 3 backups that I can turn on and turn off as needed. So that's another thing that we're seeing companies do to address that.
Well, it's so fascinating, Doug, because you think about like the ripple effect of then those suppliers then have to like then play the game on their end too to make sure that they've got enough customers. So you start thinking about the ripple effect of all that stuff is
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Yep. And the third issue goes back to talent, and this is not a new issue actually, even though it's been exacerbated over the last couple of years with everything that's happened just in the workplace with remote and hybrid and all these. But even starting around 2015, we started noticing in our surveys that talent had kind of risen to the top of the issues and the headwinds. And part of it is around, just the anonymity of the middle market.
Mm-hmm.
As consumers, a lot of us wouldn't know these businesses. They just don't have brand names. A lot of them are B2B. A lot of them are suppliers to larger businesses. So they
Mm-hmm.
just don't have a lot of name recognition when it comes to attracting talent. And then more pressing right now is as these middle market companies continue to become more technical and digital, then having the people that have those skills become harder and harder to find. So a lot of them have been telling us they've had to invest in their own training. Maybe some of the more progressive ones may partner with a community college or an organization that can help with that, but
Mm-hmm.
it continues to be a really, really big issue, which is why we're watching some of these projected growth numbers as well.
Makes a ton of sense, and I don't think I took that angle of like the technical and the digitization and how that requires the pay and the expertise. But also, Doug, and you guys might not have this in your material, but one of this investment banker that we know, they did a presentation. I don't know where, I think it was from the census or a couple of the aggregated sources about the brain drain of the boomers. So like I watched it. What was it like? I don't know, like 1.2 or something like that million people retire each year, and then COVID it was like 3.2, and then because like a lot of the baby boomers like I'm out, and there's more people like in the 55 to 65 that are now trying to get out. I don't know if that is impacting or if you guys have any information on that. I just found that as an interesting stat where like maybe it's another underlying issue, this talent issue that people haven't really identified.
Yeah. Well, that's a great segue into the other report that I wanted to talk a little bit
Yeah, it
about.
wasn't even intended, but that was
Yeah,
perfect.
it's great. It's perfect because so we worked this past summer with Fifth Third, their private bank team, on doing a study on business owner transitions. So unlike some work we had done a few years ago where we looked at how the middle market business prepared, this was more about a personal look into the actual founder or owner, how he or she thinks about these. Number one, what is the sales driver? How do they prepare? When they actually go through it, what happens, and then how do they feel about it afterwards? So it was a really interesting
That is so awesome.
piece of work. And so here's what we found. I'll just give you kind of the top level insights. Obviously, the report's available for anybody who wants to go and download it. And
yeah, we'll link it. We'll link to it in the show notes.
Yeah, it's on our site. We just thought, to your point, that it's baby boomers or people who just want to get the big check, go buy the yacht and sail off into the sunset. But actually, we found a majority of the proceeds from the sale, people are reinvesting it. They're entering new businesses. They are doing different things that aren't just purely retirement or not working.
Oh, you just broke the hearts of every wealth manager ever. No AUM, no.
So yeah, but what that means though is that as they're preparing to sell, so we looked at the timeline, who's at the table. So what we found was, on average, I mean, these things, there's a wide range of variation in terms of the preparation process and then the close of the transaction. But on average, most of the preparation took anywhere between 1 to 2 years. And that's getting the books in order, like talking to all your advisors. If you're a family-owned business, like having all the family conversations. There were a lot of things that were taking place in that lead up. And then the actual close, about half of the owners that we talked to, their close process was completed in about 6 to 12 months. So again, awesome. Large variation, but that's where we saw the bulk. So who's at the table? Some of the top advisors that were used, the leadership team of the company, the in-house attorney or external law firm, investment banks, and accountants were the top three. Probably that's no awesome. Big surprise. But, to the point about the wealth advisor, they could have a seat at that table to think through, like, okay, let's talk about your strategies for once the transition happens. What are you going to do, with the capital? Do you want to set up a trust? Do you want to do these other certain things? So
yep.
There's probably some opportunities there.
But anyway, man, exclamation point. Like I always harp on the wealth managers need, like the wealth manager and one specific business advisor, Doug, like that's one asset, right? So it's equity that's growing and you have one stream of cash flow. I'm like, you guys got to get involved because these conversations should be happening, like you said, years in advance.
Yep. The third insight we found was around the challenges that were faced or commonly cited. And there were really three that rose to the top. One was the emotional readiness. I think you mentioned, it's your baby. Like it's something that you've built and grown. So the anxiety, the fear, the frustration, maybe fear of the unknown, all of those negative feelings tended to dissipate, after the transaction into relief, happiness, accomplishment. And some of that could be tied to, a lot of these owners too, even though they sold, they may have some, maintain some connectivity. So they have a role still, even post-transition. So, but two other things. Ability to accurately value the business was a big stressor. And the third was communication, both with employees and then particularly, as I said earlier, for family-owned businesses, kind of dealing with the family issues, whether it's, generational or like siblings or all those different things tended to be some of the most commonly cited challenges.
It makes sense. That's awesome that you have the data behind it. Because I just think about all the people that come through our program or me a decade ago is like, so I barely know anything about valuations. Now I'm going to communicate to all the people that want to take part of what I've built. And then also so you have all this ambiguity around the most important topics of what is valuable and how does it all get sliced and diced and what are the options. And the one person that's dictating everything is the one person everybody thinks has got some sort of narrative around it.
Yep. And then the last thing we found was, at least the businesses we talked to, the owners that we talked to, they were all pretty satisfied with how things turned out. I mean, 77% said that they were very happy with their sale negotiation. Only less than 15% felt like they maybe sold too soon.
Oh,
And about 6 out of 10 felt that the price was higher than they might have expected, or higher than what they think their peers that they have seen sold other businesses
so
were able
clarifying
to
points on
achieve.
that. How many people did you interview for this particular survey, and when was it done?
Yeah, so the data was collected in the spring, I believe in the April timeframe. And we talked to 75. Now, part of this was the criteria for Fifth Third, who was our
Okay.
partner on this. They
Mm-hmm.
wanted ultra high net worth folks. So we were able to talk to 75
Okay.
owners
Got
with a
it.
certain kind of a net
Got it.
assets
Yeah, yeah.
under.
I'm
Yeah.
just curious, like, with the crazy multiples and the ridiculous mania that we've been at for the last 2 years, I'm wondering if that 70-some% of happiness, I mean, money can solve a lot of problems to a
Sure,
certain
sure.
extent. It was interesting to see, like, I think about what it, like, it'd be interesting to see that data at some other point, Doug, where you're like, for someone where, like, it being 3 million or 7 million will make or break retirement and everything. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, when you start to, like, play around with numbers like that, where it's like, you, it'd be interesting to see if there was other outcomes, but it's great to know that people are happier.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and that's super fascinating. There's a organization, Small Giants. You ever heard of Bo Burlingham?
Yeah. I've heard that name. Yeah.
Yeah,
I have.
I should put you in touch with him. He would love this kind of material because they're always out there surveying people, talking about like how successful their outcomes were.
Yep. Sure.
So then what can, I don't know if you wanted to just kind of get close to the wrap it up here, like what is
Yeah,
it that.
yeah. I was just going to quickly mention, really excited about this project that's underway. I don't have a lot that I can share right now, but in early 2023, we're going to be coming out with this cloud study that we partnered with Google. And that's just looking at kind of use of the platform. What are, some of the challenges along the way? What are the benefits? And that should be ready to go, within the first quarter of 2023. So,
And you're talking about like maybe your definition of the cloud as it relates to the middle market. Like what are you trying to figure out specifically?
yeah. So, I mean, Google came to us quite frankly and said, we wanna educate. It's kind of an internal learning for us, and then we want to go into the marketplace with some insights around how we could talk to middle market companies about the benefits of getting off of old, kind of, I don't want to say paper processes, but analog process, and getting
Mm-hmm.
more of their information, whether it be financial, operational, marketing, customer information, getting it into a cloud
Like out of
platform.
servers, out of analog, paper, and
Correct.
docs and all that stuff. Interesting.
Correct. Correct. And it's the same reason, so we work with Visa, for example. They're one of our sponsors. They do the same thing thinking about digital payments. They're trying to
Mm-hmm.
get middle market companies away from writing checks.
Yep.
Let's get everything onto some type of a digital payment platform. So it's kind of a similar uh, motivation
Mm-hmm.
there to
Mm-hmm.
learn kind of what companies are doing. So same as we've done with other projects, we were able to interview 400 companies. Almost all of them are using some form of cloud today. So within that, we want to know, like,
Mm-hmm.
what do you use it for? What are those applications
So
that are most
fascinating.
common?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
My God, I can't wait to see the outcomes on that because I think about, it kind of goes back to your talent issue, Doug, because like I think about like when someone rolls out an ERP system or some operation platform like that, you have to truly understand, kind of back to your old background, right? The black belt.
yep, yep,
You got to understand how the whole machine works to roll something out like that. And
yep.
they don't really teach you in school how the whole machine works. They teach you one segment of business. So that's very
Well,
fascinating to see. I wonder if that's one of the constraints of like someone being able to roll that out, because it's
yeah,
not the cost anymore. It used to be like 400 grand for a new software like that. But now it's like you get on a user subscription, but you still have to understand how to connect all the dots.
right. Yep, that's exactly right. And then I'll just wrap up with, kind of what we're looking at for 2023 and beyond. I mean, we've got some big topics that are kind of on our radar right now. We think about diversity, equity, inclusion in the middle market, like getting a little bit of a view into that. Issues around sustainability, like how important
Mm-hmm.
is it? What are middle market company? Are they doing their part around those issues? Continuing to explore things around digitization and technology. That was something that we started looking at honestly in 2018, and then it's only accelerated through the course of the last couple of years. So,
You have any insights on the like remote or hybrid work? Because I know like all
yeah,
the big corporations get all the visibility on what they're doing, but it
yeah, we
doesn't
start.
always apply.
Yeah, so it's a great call out. We started asking this question in the summer of 2020, knowing that certain industries, if you're a manufacturer, you can't really be remote. You got to have people on
Right.
the shop floor, right? So we look at it by industry generally, but we're changing that question in this next wave to kind of understand what's the future of your work environment. So it's
Mm,
no longer about coming back from a stay-at-home order. It's about have you transformed into something more permanent.
mm-hmm.
So I think in this information, I'd have to dig up the data, but it's somewhere around the area of 60% of middle market companies were fully back. You had about another 25% or so who were saying they're going to be permanently hybrid, so some form
Mm-hmm.
of remote and in the office. Very very small percentage transitioning to fully virtual, and
Mm.
a lot of those you would see in like technology, where that
People
can
that can do
easily,
that, yeah.
yeah, you can more easily do that in that scenario. And then some saying like, well, we're still thinking about when we're going to officially return. So yeah, we're going to continue to monitor that going forward. It'll just be in a slightly different way.
I like how you're doing that though. I mean, like, what's the future of your workforce instead of kind of like this pretending that we're still coming out of something.
Yeah, exactly.
Doug, I've really enjoyed this conversation, man. I appreciate all the insights and how you clearly laid them out. I would love to spark up the conversation, as you guys are rolling out these other reports. As I was mentioning, we're going to be doing these quarterly updates. So if you want to hit your ride and, let everybody know what's up and kind of give the link to the reports going forward.
Sure.
But I appreciate it. What's the best place for people to find you, the reports and the links?
Yeah, I would say go to our website. It's middlemarketcenter.org. All of the content, all of these reports, the MMI itself, all the historical data, like there's so much out there. It's great to just go in and explore. We have a knowledge center right off the main landing page. You can just kind of poke around, do a search by topic or by format. But middlemarketcenter.org is the best place to find our material. And then there's contact information if people want to reach out to me directly as well.
Awesome, Doug. One last question, man, and I don't want to catch you too off guard. So, the name of the show is Intentional Growth, and at episode 200, I started asking what the word intentional means to people, and I've got a crazy, awesome library of people's definitions. And so, I'd love to, like I said, you don't have to come up with something monumental or anything like that, but the word intentional, what does it mean to you?
When I hear the word intentional, I think it's about having a vision and a plan, but actually following it up with action and activity. Right. So it's
Love
not
it,
one
man.
thing to be like, hey, I want to go and have this grand vision, but then if you can't follow it up with an executional plan, then it really isn't going to go anywhere. So that's kind of my practical side as a supply chain person. I would often deal with a lot of creative folks who were like, oh, we're gonna launch this product all over the world, and it's like, well, practically, let's take a step back and think about how you're going to do that. But no, being intentional about something is saying, you know what, this is what's feasible. Let's think big, but then let's back that up with feasibility and then march forward. So that's how I would define
Doug, that's awesome, man. That's got to be one of my favorites. I love it.
it.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, Doug. Well,
Sure, my
hope to have you
pleasure.
again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.